Good morning and welcome. It is our privilege to be here today, family and friends of Joan and Tom, as we say this final farewell, honour their memories, the celebration of lives lived to the full, and now, according to Joan's wishes, their peacefulness together once more. And thank you, Chris and John, for such a caring and thoughtful service, and the music you've chosen adding its own magic to this special occasion. This morning we have gathered to place the ashes of Joan Mary Edridge with those of her second husband, Tom Topless. Tom was Welsh. Born at Edridge in the Rhondda Valley in 1910, he was the elder son of a butcher and had 4 sisters. Tom's father died when he was still at school, and his mother then took over the running of their shop. Tom helped her for a while, but he didn't enjoy the work, and there was no money for him to continue full-time education. So eventually he joined the London Metropolitan Police, spending the war years with the Royal Military Police. And Tom met Joan around 1960 and initially managed one of her shops. They married in 1979, and they had mutual interests in cruising and travel, and for many years owned a Fiat camper van. Of all the places they visited, New Zealand impressed them the most, and they decided to buy a house here at Athenry. But sadly, before the purchase of the house was completed, Tom unexpectedly died in a neighbouring property in 1994, and that is how he comes to be buried in the Returned Services Association section of this cemetery. There was only one kind of music that interested Tom, and John has memories of his father listening to a weekly programme on the radio with the following tune, and this recording is by the Treorchy Male Choir. For Treorchy is the next town to Edridge in the Rhondda Valley. So we will keep a welcome in the hillside. And of course, in Tom's case, the words of the song didn't quite come true, but there are hillsides and vales all around us today. Joan was born in England at the end of the First World War and died in New Plymouth on the 11th of July last year, just 3 days short of her 98th birthday. And Joan had an idyllic childhood with her mother, father and sister, They lived in various parts of the country, but mostly in Ilford, Essex, just outside London. And after school, Joan became a secretary in London, and when the Second World War broke out, she joined her father, a chartered surveyor who was working on airfields around the country. And Joan loved swimming in the sea, and indeed whenever she could, whether it be Devon, Cornwall, Essex or New Zealand, New Plymouth, where she went for her daily swim until the age of 85. Sometimes it was a bit scary because she would go far out to sea, but she had sea in her blood, as she came from a long line of merchant seamen, with her forefathers and parents coming from the southwest of England. It is no surprise that she was herself a little bit quaint. They mostly are in Devon and Cornwall. Her paternal grandfather had drowned off the coast in South Korea when her father was just 2 years old. And in those days there was not a welfare state, and life was very tough for her father. But from adversity came strength and determination in abundance, qualities that were most certainly passed on to Joan. And she met and married Eric Browning during the Second World War, and after the war they set up a retail business. Joan was the driving force behind it, her working day often starting at 4 o'clock in the morning. And the business grew and became very successful. Long hours and hard work were the orders of the day, and she remained in business until she retired at the age of 55. After Eric died, she married Tom, an extremely kind and vivacious man, famous for his Welsh cakes. They had a great life together, travelled the world. They had a house in Spain and spent many happy holidays there, but they both loved New Zealand and often escaped the English winter for the milder climate down under. Then after Tom passed away in New Zealand, she married Ted, who'd been a neighbour of hers in Athenry, and every summer for the next 14 years they returned to England. They were taken to concerts by Ted's nephew, to hear the London Symphony Orchestra, and also to the opera on a regular basis. She had to endure Ted's genealogy hobby, which she did with a smile on her face as they went through thousands of records. Ted was very fond of a tenacious debate. Joan, relaxed with her eyes closed, her tip to bringing the debates to a happy ending was to say very affectionately, "If you say so, dear." And so both debaters were content to end the debate there. During her working life, Joan was an extremely smart lady. Susan Small or Norman Hartnell were some of her clothes she wore, and Vidal Sassoon cut her hair. And after she retired, she discovered op shops, called charity shops in England. She thought she was in seventh heaven. Getting a bargain was something of a family failing. Her mother at one time had been at an auction, and on the next day a battered old caravan was delivered onto the front lawn. Shock and horror came from her husband, Joan's father, who immediately dispatched it to the tip, together with a few very well-chosen words. But Joan's greatest love was playing the piano. She started playing at the age of 7 and got out of all the household chores as she had to do her practice. And at the age of 60, she went to university and gained a degree in music and reached concert pianist level. Joan loved all of her family and step-family and friends, and in particular, when her sister died, Joan became a second mother to her family, and she meant the world to them. She was always there for them, and they in turn adored her. And in particular, Margaret Smith made numerous visits to New Zealand, particularly when Joan was in poor health. And John and Tony also made some timely visits from England when Joan was in poor health, and Chris visited her several times a week while she was in her fine old homes in New Plymouth. For the last 3 months of her life, Joan was a resident at the Rhapsody nursing home. The staff were marvellous, and little by little she joined in with the many activities there. She was diligent about doing her exercise classes 3 times a week, but she also enjoyed playing bowls, golf, and of all things, bingo. Everyone was very friendly and gracious to her, and she was very happy there. And a dog that used to come and visit the residents, Joan always loved dogs, having had several herself, and this particular dog used to love being in her room and was loath to leave. He must have sensed her love for animals. And Joan had a sense of humour which, to the last, the natural lenses in her eyes had been replaced because of cataracts, and much later, after a few years of poor eyesight, it was realised that the replacement lenses needed to be cleaned with lasers. This was done just 4 weeks before she passed away, and her sight became so good she would actually mention wrinkles on faces or that people were looking a bit tired. And when told at the eye clinic that, because her own eyesight had improved, white sticks and dogs for the blind had been put on special offer, she could see the funny side of it and couldn't stop laughing. Indeed, when John and Tammy left Joan for the last time, she was looking at a recording of Chopin's Piano Concerto on a tablet and had recognized Andre Previn as the conductor, and the pianist was the virtuoso Arthur Rubinstein. So let us enjoy some of Chopin's Second Piano Concerto from the second movement. On the long flight home, John was listening to a recording of piano music by Bach, and he thought Joan might like it and sent her a CD. Indeed, Joan did like it, and Chris played it to her again when she sat with Joan in her final hours. and this was the first track on the CD by Johann Sebastian Bach. Let us now carry out Joan's wish that her ashes should be with those of Tom, and remembering Joan's qualities, her humour, her kindness, her thinking of others, her hard work, and her capacity to be philosophical. Earth to earth, ashes to ashes, and dust to dust. And grant to the living grace, and to the departed peace. At this point, it would seem to be appropriate to say a prayer or to read a poem. But on this occasion, we've decided to do both by listening to the words written by the Welsh poet, writer Dylan Thomas, who was born in 1914. And this poem is taken from Unto Milkwood, and the words are also sung by the Treorchy Male Voice Choir. Eli Jenkins' Prayer. and say goodbye, but just for now. Beautiful though that was, we don't think that Tom or Joan would want this short ceremony to end on such a solemn note. So let's end with some music to celebrate their lives. And this was written by the British composer John Stanley in the 1700s. He was a contemporary of Handel. A childhood accident meant that he was almost blind for most of his life. But let us enjoy the trumpet tune from John Stanley. And I invite you to come and scatter some earth and some rosemary for remembrance while we listen to this. This world is no conclusion, for a sequel lies beyond, invisible as music, but positive as a song.